Hello RedCaseStory listeners, welcome back to our channel that brings you haunting and heartbreaking true crime stories from all corners of the world. We hope you are safe, sound, and always surrounded by people who bring peace to your life. Because in today's world, danger doesn't always come from the shadows. Sometimes, it hides behind a smile. Today's story is about a woman named Mayang Prasetyo, a beautiful soul from Indonesia who sought freedom, love, and a new life in Australia. But instead of a bright future, her story ended in horror. The person she trusted most became the one who took everything from her. This is not just a story about murder, it's about identity, about resilience, and about how society sometimes fails to protect the most vulnerable. This is the story of Mayang Prasetyo, a young woman full of dreams, whose life was stolen in the most tragic way. Mayang Prasetyo was born in Indonesia in 1987. From a young age, she knew exactly who she was, a confident, warm, and vibrant young woman with big dreams. But growing up as a transgender woman in a conservative society wasn't easy. Despite the challenges, Mayang refused to let the world define her. She was determined to live her truth. She embraced her identity with pride, and she worked hard to support her loved ones. Her family, who lived in Lampung, saw her as a provider, a daughter who was making sacrifices to lift them up. Eventually, Mayang moved to Australia, to the bustling city of Brisbane, where she hoped for acceptance, opportunity, and freedom. In Australia, she lived a double life. By day, she was quiet, often keeping to herself. But by night, she worked as a high-end escort for elite clients. It was dangerous, yes, but it gave her the ability to send money back to her family, helping them survive and thrive. Friends described her as bubbly, kind-hearted, and full of life. She loved fashion, music, and dancing. Her smile could light up a room. But as with many stories in the shadows, there was a darker side. And it entered her life in the form of a man named Marcus Voke. Marcus Voke was a chef from Australia. On the surface, he was polite, introverted, and reserved. He had traveled overseas, working on cruise ships, and that's where he eventually met Mayang. Their connection was quick, passionate, and intense. Soon, they were married and living together in a modern apartment in Brisbane's upmarket Tenerife neighborhood. It was a beautiful space, sleek, modern, quiet, the kind of place where you'd never expect something dark to unfold. To neighbors and outsiders, they seemed like a loving couple. Marcus was quiet. Mayang was elegant and radiant. They were private, but polite. No one saw anything unusual, but behind the closed doors of apartment 17, things were different. There were arguments, jealousy, paranoia. Marcus had started becoming increasingly controlling. He struggled with mental health issues and had been seeing a therapist for anxiety. He hated Mayang's job. He hated the independence she had. He was insecure. And slowly, he began pulling away and pulling her down with him. The once sweet romance began to crack. And what started as minor arguments escalated into a toxic storm. October 2014, residents of the apartment complex began complaining of a powerful, unbearable smell coming from one of the units. It was strong, rancid. Something wasn't right. Building management sent maintenance workers to investigate. When they reached the unit shared by Mayang and Marcus, no one answered. Police were called. Inside the apartment, the air was suffocating. The electricity had been turned off. There were candles. A broken silence. Marcus was there. He told the officers Mayang had gone out. But his story didn't sit right. Officers asked to look around. That's when they found it, in the kitchen. Large steel pots on the stove. Inside them were body parts, human remains, a torso, limbs, The stench of decomposition was overwhelming. It was Mayang. Marcus had murdered her? And not just that. He had dismembered her body and tried to destroy the evidence by boiling the remains in chemicals. It was the kind of horror that no one expected to ever witness outside a movie, but this was real. A woman had been butchered. Not by a stranger, but by her own husband. Realizing the police were closing in and that everything was unraveling, Marcus fled. He dashed out of the building barefoot, running through alleyways and industrial backstreets in the Brisbane night. Officers chased him, but he slipped away. Moments later, his body was found at a nearby electricity substation. He had taken his own life. He used a piece of broken glass to end it all. There was no note, no explanation, no apology, just silence. Mayang was gone. Marcus was gone. But the horror they left behind would haunt Brisbane and the entire Indonesian community for years to come. After Marcus Vok's suicide, detectives were left with a horrifying scene and a long list of questions. The apartment unit in Tenerife became a crime scene, one that would take weeks to fully process. Forensic teams found chilling evidence. Mayang's body had been dismembered in the bathtub. Parts of her were cooked on the stove. There were cleaning supplies nearby, gloves, a mask, and even butcher's tools. Marcus had likely tried to clean up before the smell exposed everything. But decomposition moves fast, especially in a hot, sealed apartment. Police concluded that the murder happened several days before the discovery. They also found search history on Marcus's laptop. He had looked up how to dispose of a body, how to dissolve remains, and even methods used by serial killers. This wasn't a sudden act. It had been building up, but why? Why would a man with no known criminal past, who seemed normal, commit something so grotesque? The answer may never be fully known. But some clues were there, buried in his mental health. In the weeks that followed, more came out about Marcus's mental state. He had been dealing with severe anxiety. He had seen psychologists and had episodes of paranoia. According to therapists, he feared being abandoned. He had trouble controlling his emotions, and perhaps most telling, Marcus felt threatened by Mayang's independence. Mayang wasn't just his wife, she was a confident, successful woman. She earned money. She had freedom. And she had a life outside of Marcus. That threatened his control. Some believe he grew increasingly paranoid, imagining infidelity or betrayal. Their arguments were escalating. Then, something snapped. Police believe Mayang may have been murdered during a heated fight. A burst of violence. And afterward, Marcus didn't know what to do, so he tried to hide it. To clean it up. To erase what he had done, but evil leaves traces. News of Mayang's death traveled fast. From Australia to Indonesia, her family, living in Lampung, were devastated. Her mother and siblings were in shock. Mayang had always called home. She was the provider, the golden child. Her mother once said, "She was our hope. She supported all of us." Now she's gone. The family couldn't afford to bring her body home. So, with help from Indonesian consulate officials, a portion of her ashes was sent back to her village. Her death became national news in Indonesia, not just because of the brutality, but because Mayang was a transgender woman. In a deeply conservative society, this opened up conversations that were often ignored or whispered in silence, but with those conversations came controversy. As news spread, the Australian media made a tragic mistake. Headlines referred to Mayang not as a woman, but as a male escort, cross-dresser, or even worse. Some tabloids sensationalized the case, using her gender identity as clickbait. The murder was turned into a spectacle, a grotesque headline. They didn't just report her death, they mocked her identity. It caused global outrage. Activists, trans rights groups, and LGBTQ organizations condemned the language. They argued that Mayang wasn't just murdered once, she was being erased in death. She was a woman, she lived as a woman, she died as a woman, and she deserved dignity. The backlash was so strong that several publications were forced to change their headlines. Some issued public apologies, but the damage was already done. Mayang's story was not just about domestic violence, it became a symbol of something larger, the violence faced by transgender women, especially those of color, and especially migrants. Many trans women around the world face abuse, rejection, unemployment, and homelessness. They often work in dangerous industries because other doors are closed. Mayang had dreams. She was helping her family. She found love. And yet, in the end, she was treated like she didn't belong by her killer, and later, by the headlines. Her story forced both Australia and Indonesia to confront some uncomfortable truths. The hashtag #JusticeForMayang started to appear across social media. Vigils were held in both Australia and Indonesia, quiet, candlelit ceremonies remembering a young woman who had been taken too soon. In Melbourne and Sydney, people held signs reading, "Say her name." She was someone's daughter. She was someone's whole world. Activists weren't just mourning her death, they were demanding systemic change. These questions have no easy answers, but one thing was clear: Mayang didn't just fall through the cracks, she was erased, and that is the tragedy behind the tragedy.
Mayang Prasetyo should be remembered, not just for how she died, but for how she lived. She was a woman with dreams, a daughter sending money home to her mother in Indonesia, a brave soul who embraced her identity in a world that didn't always welcome her. Her ashes were scattered in her hometown in Lampung. Her mother wept. Her siblings prayed. And her friends promised never to forget her. To this day, her story is used in advocacy campaigns across Southeast Asia and Australia, as a reminder that trans rights are human rights. That every life deserves dignity. That love should never become a death sentence. We tell these stories not to scare you, but to wake us up to the reality that safety, respect, and human dignity are not always guaranteed. Mayang Prasetyo's case is a reminder that the people we love the most can also become the ones who betray us. That silence in the face of injustice only deepens the wound. That a society that doesn't protect its most vulnerable is a society in crisis. She was more than a headline, more than a victim, she was Mayang, and she mattered. If there's one thing we can take from her story, it's this: let us never look away from pain. Let us never forget her name. Thank you for joining us on RedCaseStory. Stay safe. Stay alert. And remember, justice starts with being willing to see the truth, even when it hurts.